Welcome, everyone, to another great session learning about technology, project management tools with Advisicon. I'm very excited today for us to be able to really dig in and talk about something called PowerApps, which if you haven't had a chance to learn, which is part of the Microsoft ecosystem, you'll get a chance to understand a little bit more about that today. And of course, Advisicon is here to help answer questions. I'm actually really more excited about it. I get to do my first presentation with Kirsten Ray. And Kirsten is our lead developer.
Everybody.
Kirsten, do you want to say hi and just introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm the lead developer here at Advisicon. I came to them with 20 years of experience in the industry, and I'm just looking forward to sharing today.
Wonderful. Well, as you know, we love to share what we learn. I'm sure today we'll probably answer questions. It may even open more doors for you, and that's the goal, is really to help you guys understand how in the project management field, whether you're a business decision maker, you're a project manager, you're a team lead, or maybe even a developer, what is this Power App thing? How does it work? What's happening? So today we won't be talking about the encyclopedia of all information about Power Apps. That's just way more time than we have. But I want to make sure you guys have a chance to dig in and really learn about some of the gotchas, why you use Power Apps. Why is this important going forward? There's times when we talk about when you should use it or when you shouldn't use that. And of course, Kirsten's going to do a great little demo for us, just kind of walk you through so you can actually see an application that's built and how it works and some of the moving parts. And then, as always, we're a teaching organization, so we love to make sure we point you to our trainings and other places that you can go and learn so that you can incorporate this into your work world. So what's interesting about Power Apps is that if you think about the ecosystem of systems, applications, processes, project program portfolio management, there's a lot of stuff going on. And what's interesting about that is that in this ecosystem of connected platforms and systems is you really have people, right? You have the needs to automate, but that data might live in lots of different data sources, or there may be a whole bunch of different Microsoft tools that happen to be out there. Kirsten, I think we were just talking a little bit about, some of our customers and what they're wrestling with. And, when you look at this, I was just thinking about some of the things that we just did recently, but how many of these touch points did you say got folded in, or how many different data points did we have to go chase down? It's always a moving target. So as we look through this in terms of what are the elements there, let's talk about the project management world for just a moment. So in thinking about core data sets, we could talk about Outlook, right? Everyone uses Outlook. They use a browser, OneNote. I don't know, Kirsten, if you use OneNote, but OneNote has been around even in the Windows 3.0 days. They had these little binders you could put stuff together, but people are tracking stuff in sticky notes and Teams. Oh my goodness, Teams, like we're using Teams today, which we'll play around with. But we get into the project, Microsoft Project for the web, Project Online, Project Operations. Oh my gosh, we got Planner. There's a lot of these systems, but they are connected and they are in a Office 365 ecosystem. We talk about kind of Azure being this central area. So in terms of this, thinking about Power Apps is the ability to talk between these systems quickly, efficiently, and easily versus trying to figure out, well, what's the language of Planner? Or what are the objects, methods, properties? What are the applicational components? How do we make these go together? Well, Microsoft is trying to rebuild that barrier. And I'm going to quickly show here, this is the accelerator that Microsoft came out with January of 2021, which kind of bundles Power BI, Project for the web, some of this intake request forms, but it's a Power App. They're basically kind of bringing things into one window so your end users aren't hopping around to do some of that. So whether you're looking at, your punch list of work, or perhaps even looking at reporting and resources and other elements, is that these things get brought together in a way that are helpful. So, and I think, Christian, I don't know what your thought is on the low code, no code comment that's out there, but that's what Microsoft's saying, is that they have a power platform, the Power Play, right? Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate. Christian, I don't know about you, but when I talk about no code, we end up getting to writing code in areas. Certainly Power Apps, you're going to be doing it there. Power BI, if you've ever had a chance to play with it, Certainly can. Kirsten, I think we could go way off the deep end of the code side of things, but then what do you think? Power Automate? Any code there?
Not as much, but still very much thinking about the structures that you're in. And low code is probably correct for simple and non-complex things, but as soon as you get into a complex solution, you are definitely doing a little bit of code, and we'll see that in the demo.
Absolutely. So remember, Power Automate, or what used to be called Flow, was, we'd actually go through and say, hey, look, we can look at these events, like building a rule in Outlook. So there are great ways that you can scale. So one thing that I'm going to encourage you guys to do is, if you want to reach out, if you're watching this video and it's, a couple years from now or a couple months from now, there are some great Gartner reports. There are some amazing Forrester reports that have a lot of the details around this. And we pulled some stats out here, which is when organizations began looking at kind of moving to automation, PowerApps is driving business. They're looking at the ROI of reducing manual processes. So if you're interested in those reports, send us an email, contact us. We've got a lot of these things that are available, and talking, 20, 30, 40 pages of information where I'm not going to try and squeeze it all in on a single slide. But in thinking of how it's being implemented, how are organizations adopting this, they really are beginning to make that transition. And so while we may be the early voices in the wilderness crying out saying, hey, listen, pay attention, this is coming, it is coming, it's here, and it's transitioning. So in the why, thinking about, what is PowerApps and how does that fit in terms of an automation or a coding environment that actually is connected to the Microsoft ecosystem, the why, of course, again, is being able to say, listen, is it SharePoint data? Is it Excel data? Is it something in Azure? Is it Dynamics? We can pull these, and we can also pull applications together. So whether it's a model-driven app, or I think, Kirsten, you're going to show a Canvas app, or we're going to just quickly show how this works and where you get your data. But are you deploying an application to an end user in Teams? Are you deploying it on a mobile device, right? We have to think about, hey, we need a vehicle to help us get there. So in terms of the Power App structure, is that here's some key points I think that we were trying to figure out how much we can actually say in a short period of time, but the whole idea is, why is this important? Why would you use this tool? Kirsten, any key points that you want to call out? I mean, thinking from a developer to maybe a project manager, or a developer to # a non-developer, what would you say it would be the right reason to grab PowerApps off the shelf and maybe approach that versus going to Java, C# or .NET?
Well, certainly in this, especially if you're in a Microsoft environment, this makes providing an application or a UI for your data really easy. And just being able to have templates and tools that can get you up and running fairly quickly is the draw of PowerApps. Not having to have a super technical person to create and maintain these things, I think, is the biggest draw.
I know I used to develop programs, and now, my dev team won't let me write code anymore, and probably a good thing about that. But I mean, the uplift, right, isn't that we're learning a huge language now. Really, we're beginning to work in a very common platform, regardless of whether, hey, maybe you're in the Microsoft project world, or maybe you're in the SharePoint world. When we begin building this app, it is a tool that bridges across the different Microsoft connected systems. And I think that makes sense. Is that it's going to go quicker. Once you learn it, you get better. Now, there is some learning to do. It's not like you just pick it up and, you fell off a turnip truck and now you can, record a macro or go into Outlook and create a rule. Not quite like that, but I think the idea is that there is definitely a faster transition to getting to things to being automated. So, go ahead, jump in.
Having the option to communicate between all of the Microsoft, all of the software that's in Microsoft is phenomenal here.
Now, Microsoft has what, three programs? 4. Right? It's crazy. Like, stuff's changing every week. And I remember talking when Microsoft was launching Planner. And the first thing that we were asking about is, well, how do we automate these things? They said, well, you're going to use part of the Power Platform, which would be Power Automate. What back then they used to call it Flow. But then Flow didn't even have all the events that were in Planner. And so all the Microsoft application teams were going to the Flow team going, hey, add this, add this, add this, add this thing in here so you could do this. And so they had this huge backlog of trying to make sure that these events, these objects, things you can reference were registered. And of course, this was many years ago, so Microsoft continues to grow beyond what they've had. Well, Flow may not be a code type of environment, right? We talk about Power Automate, but as we move into PowerApps, there are many cases that just says the branching logic has to be there. We have to be able to twist and transition with many different types of variables or conditions. So I think it's important to understand. Kirsten, anything before we move on? Are we good?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so let's talk about infinite power, right? This clearly is what we want to solve in the world, right? So what's interesting is at Advisicon, we are advisors, right? So we're here to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great things about technology and how to use that. So there are gotchas, and I think, these gotchas disappear over time, and sometimes they emerge depending on what's happening, but, certainly infinite power, as we see in this picture, it doesn't quite work this way. And so there are some limitations that we wanted to call out before we get into digging a little bit deeper. First off, one of the big things that I have, and Kirsten, I think after that you can jump in and talk about this, is that I have conversations with organizations, especially as they are moving to Office 365. And they're like, oh, we love this. What does it take to do it? They say, oh, hey, look, a little training, some consulting, configuration time. Wonderful. And then they ask the question, what about licensing? And so in order to get these sometimes free applications, you still have to go buy a Microsoft license. So, back in the old days when Word and Excel was fairly new, people were like, oh, I got to get a Microsoft Office license. Hey, everybody just has that stuff now. Well, Power BI, same thing. Yeah, people want to read reports. We need to make sure we get the right licensing to showcase these things. When we start building an app in PowerApps, you're going to make sure that you need to have licenses. That doesn't mean you have to buy a license 7 times over for somebody who used 7 different PowerApps. But the idea is that at some point, somebody's going to be purchasing a license to leverage that technology in an organization. So early on, this has been a big surprise for people. They're like, what? I got to go and buy a license for this, this, and this? Yeah, this is kind of the tip of the spear of the first time you're building a Power App component. And you need to think through that because there are costs involved, which, again, Microsoft, they get their pound of flesh, they get their nickel, eventually at the end of the day. But it's not something that just says, hey, I got a .NET application, I can build it and deploy it, and it's an exe file. I don't have to license that for an organization. People just go to a browser and run that. It doesn't quite work that way. So that's one of the big limitations that I've seen people say, oh, I didn't realize I needed to go and get additional licensing. So be prepared for that. Kirsten, what else are you thinking of, that you've seen, certainly building apps, doing significant migrations, things that you've run into?
So depending on the license you have, that may determine what sort of data sources you can use. So if you're only using an Office 365 license, you only have access to using the SharePoint lists as your backend data, where a different license might allow you to use SQL Server or other external data sources. So that's one thing to be conscious of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, remember, we got to get data. So where does that data live? You may need to have access to that. Anything else?
No, I think that's it in terms of limitations here. Just mostly on that last one, too. When you're considering what you're creating a solution for, looking at Power Apps, maybe Power Apps will not be the best option for you, depending on how complex that solution has to be.
Right, because the deployment model depends on what you're doing, whether you're replicating it or like you said, talking about importing it and putting it somewhere, may not be as quick and easy. So there's some questions that, you need to ask. And I think, Kirsten, for us, as we step into this, we in many cases are on the bleeding edge. Microsoft isn't telling us, we're figuring it out. And so I encourage people to reach out. If you have questions, we're happy to go this route, don't go this route. I think it's just based upon our experience. And that changes almost on a weekly, monthly basis in terms of what flexibility capabilities are.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier is just being surprised that maybe something will work one day and perhaps not the next, or you'll be surprised by something that pops up. So
Yep,
that's
absolutely.
something that's part of being on that bleeding edge.
And what's funny is I opened a project today. There was an update that had rolled out. And I went, oh, things look different. That means all my screenshots need to be changed if I'm trying to teach somebody if it's something current. But yeah, you just have to pay attention to those kind of things. Well, good. Not to dwell on just kind of the, hey, take a deep cleansing breath. This won't work if you go over 55 miles an hour. That's not what we're saying. But there are some things you need to pay attention to. And I think that's important, is to be able to ask and check in and validate. So with that in mind, Kirsten, why don't we switch to a demo, and maybe we can just show them the tool and get in and walk through there. Tell us about what we're going to look at.
All right, so what we want to look at today is just the time off request application that we use here at Advisicon. Just want to talk about what it does and then get under the hood a little and show you around.
We get time off? I never get to use this form. I need to use this form. Go ahead.
So we have this user, and you come first to this interface where you can actually request time off, right? So if you click on request time off, you'll notice that you can see all of the requests that have happened before. We want to create a new request.
And this is the Power App, right? You've actually just said, hey, look, let's gen this up. And
this is a Power App. Let's see here. Let's do 2. We'll take Thursday and Friday off. Let's do vacation.
What I think one of the things that while you're filling in the data there, one of the items that I've run into is that, you can spend a lot more time making something look pretty, but remember, in many cases, mobile apps, we want things to be simple. And so PowerApps, from my experience, from what I'm seeing, is that it'll generate the interface for you, give you kind of a sample interface to start with, and let you begin working from that. Is that correct?
That is correct. And this, you'll notice that this format is a mobile app format. Let's see, there's mobile app, tablet, and different formats here. So we're submitting this request, and what's happening here is the request is getting submitted. It shows up on their list that it was submitted, and the approver gets an email, and it looks something like this, where they get an email with the request, who it's from, and then a link to go to the app.
Now this is pulling data from different data sources, right? Because I think we have some SQL data that we stored. We actually have an accounting system. It's pulling out vacation, sick leave, availability, so it refreshes the form as people are looking. But it has a whole data source behind it, right?
Yeah, so this particular SQL server is out in our Azure space. We have a user list here and the request list. And we have several connections, and let's see here. So in our Power App space, we can connect to different data sources. And this particular one is our Azure SQL server plus Office 365. So we have different connections that you can set up and use within your Power Apps.
So you could pull it from Excel, from a SharePoint list, from SQL, from Oracle. I mean, you've got a lot of options in terms of where that data may be coming from. Again, back to that whole licensing conversation, which is make sure you've got the right licensing to access the things that you're using.
Yes. So after a request is sent, the approver goes into the app and looks at the approvals that they have available or that they need to process. We'll click here to go in and process, and you can approve or not.
I notice here you're approving your own time off. Is that correct?
Let's see. All right, so let's go ahead and approve this. And what that does is it actually sends an email to the approver and the requester to say that it was requested. So we can come back here and hit refresh for the requester, and they can see that it was approved.
So you can put administrative screens. You can get pretty formal and fancy. Ours is pretty simple, right? The idea is, hey, time off.
Right.
Let people know how much time they have available, route it to the correct person, correct? And then, we may have to, add or remove people as they come and go. But a lot of that is, like you said, synchronized. So hey, perfect. You're going right where I'm wondering is, what does this look like under the hood?
Yeah, so let's go to the requests. And this is in edit mode. So this is us editing that app. And the app is made up of different components on the screen. If you click around, you can see the different labels and icons. And this is a gallery here of the requests, which is just taking a list of the requests. Let's see here. So I wanted to show you that if we click on the plus, we're adding a new request, and you can see the action here where it says on select. So this is what you're coding when you want to navigate to another screen. So we're navigating to the new request screen. And so if we were to click on this in the live app, we would actually go here to a new screen.
So not just within the application does it show you all the forms and objects and things that happen to be here, but also the event model in terms of running the automation allows you certainly to bridge outside of certainly this simple Power App, but to other systems.
And I wanted to show one thing here. Each of these cards here is a specific request. And I wanted to show how we could do some sort of formatting here and to give you an idea of what coding might be like. So we have approved, we have rejected. What if we wanted to give a visual of what's approved and what's rejected? So maybe we'll make approved green and make rejected red. So we would put in some logic here. This item, approved or rejected, is the status of that item. And so it's equal to approved, then we want the color to be green. And you'll notice that we are creating this logic on the color property here. We have a list of many properties.
Ah, look at that. So if you don't know your properties of any object or what you're looking at, Microsoft actually gives you the list on the left. It actually helps. Now, again, I think as we talk about low code, no code, well, we're seeing code, right? And clearly, when we get into Power Apps, is we're taking it above and beyond what Power Automate or Flow could do and saying, now we really want to take this up a notch where we can actually do a lot more automatic formatting, moving data, flagging or updating. So there will be code, right? It doesn't mean like 100% no code in the Microsoft environment, right?
Right. So what we have here is we're saying if the status is approved, then the color is green. Or if the status is rejected, the color is red, and it defaults to black if it's not one of those two things. And so you'll notice that we see now where we have approved is green and rejected is red.
Excellent. So properties on the right.
Not really code heavy, but certainly there is logic to decide what's happening here. And even at this gallery level, let's see if I wanted to go to the approvals here. Approved. So this screen here, we can get behind this a little bit here. So when an approver decides to approve something, they'll pick approve or reject, maybe put in some comments, and then they'll click this button. Well, this button has to kick off the process of approval. And you'll notice here that this looks pretty intimidating, but that one button updates the approved status to whatever was chosen in the drop down, approved or rejected. That happens here. And then it moves on to emailing the user and the approver. So the approver has a copy of what they've chosen, and the requester gets an answer. And then we see that here. Now, once the approval has been made, it then resets the form and then navigates back to the approval list so that the approver can then process the next approval that they need to do. So not completely codeless, especially if you need to do any sort of filtering or any sort of automation, but certainly not the type of coding that you would see if you had to code in C# or Java or things like that.
Well, and you're not having to tell it to, hey, I've got to create a whole application just to go pull my data, right? Going to the SharePoint list or going to the environment, these are all contained. And so those are already pre-set up. So I think that actually allows you to kind of get down to more time either formatting or working with the actual application versus building the connection points within the ecosystem.
Right. And so it's like ready-made functions for you to use. You give it the data, you don't have to build them, and you don't have to worry about how those connections are being made. That's already done for you.
Perfect. Well, excellent. Well, thank you for kind of lifted up the hood of the car and taking a look at a peek at some of these elements. And I like the idea of red or green on approve and rejected. I think that'll help. But the fun part of this, in fact, let me bring back our PowerPoint here, is that really, and just understanding what PowerApps is and how it begins to filter in, and as part of that hierarchy of that stair step that says, hey, maybe I'm looking at automation. Yes, in Word and Excel, you could record a macro, turn that on. But boy, as we start looking at Flow, hey, Flow doesn't have any code necessarily that allows us to look at a logic or a workflow. But then at some point, maybe I need to do charting and graphing and dashboards. Well, guess what? PowerApps can pull that in, but also can give you branching logic and certainly a lot more control. And today, not this is the end all of PowerApps, but I want people to understand that says, you know what, you're going to be encountering this more and more. And while you begin to learn the interface, it's actually pretty easy to pick up in terms of working with. So we get a lot of questions about, where do I go to find out information about PowerApps? Or, hey, listen, what's happening in the development space? Or we hear what's called the Dataverse, Microsoft working in their entire, he used to call it CDS, Common Data Service, CDM, Common Data Model. This whole Dataverse is now beginning to come together more and more. How do I find information? What are some things that I can do to learn? So, short of, picking up the phone, asking a couple questions, which again, I encourage people to reach out. I know it's a lot of times, what's changed, what's new. It's part of our job is to stay on top of that. Microsoft has some distribution channels, and I encourage you guys to go out and take a look at some of these. Remember, this whole Microsoft channel called PowerApps at Microsoft.com. A lot of good information. Certainly there are comments and feedbacks and videos that are available. You also should look at something called the Power Platform, either on YouTube. Microsoft also has distribution and learning, but the Power Platform spreads it across Power BI, Power Apps, and certainly Power Automate or Flow as it used to be. But I encourage people to go out and take a look at that. There is more and more content being released here. Here's an example of us putting some information out there. But you can also get training. And if you'd like us to kind of coach you, train you, that would be something that would be helpful. Let us know. But the idea is that in many cases that technology stack is changing. Things that didn't work before work now, or things that used to work a certain way now have changed as Microsoft continues to evolve their technology. So I think it's important for people to kind of take a look out there. And there is a lot more content that's being released. So in learning, I think it's a great place to start and move to. In summary today, kind of looking back at, PowerApps for the project manager, kind of thinking as a business decision maker, as a leader, or maybe even you're part of a team and you need to kind of automate things and you're technical enough, I think it's important to say, what do we need to be aware of? So PowerApps, for those who are kind of picking it up, is, again, Microsoft's preferred low-code, no-code platform. They are going to continue to invest in this environment. And as you work in the Dynamics space, or you work in the Office 365 space, or the Azure space, you're going to find that a lot of these elements are designed to work together. And of course, as you work and look at the stacked in terms of pieces that are coming together to be built and used, that is an intent, right? There's actually intent to make sure that they are able to back up those pickup trucks, drop those tailgates, and we can pass and share information. In fact, you'll find that these, in many cases, even the Microsoft project space, these are being bundled together with PowerApps. So think about, consumable models for your team, things to jump on. And again, in terms of limitations, we get it, right? Licensing, Microsoft is going to make sure that you have the correct licensing. You may need to pay attention to that. Kirsten, anything else you want to add, kind of a key point from a summary, anything that just kind of jumps out in your mind that maybe a year ago or 6 months ago, if somebody came to you and said, yeah, you're going to write PowerApps next week, where would you want them to be pointed to?
Well, I think the key here is that this will provide an opportunity to be more efficient, right, in creating things for your company at your team level or at your company level. It's just a good platform. I think that it will only get better. Mm-hmm. It already connects so many things. The opportunities really at this point there's a lot of opportunities even at the start of PowerApps. And knowing that it's going to get better from here is just an awesome prospect.
I agree. I tell people if I could redo my career, and I've had a very wide career, I probably would have been got into frosting. And people go, what? What do you mean frosting? Like, well, I would have been like a Power BI guy, right? Because the ability to really create nice presentations is helpful. You use the data that we dig into. Well, PowerApps is going to be one of those facilitating products that helps you move and automate, eliminate some of those manual steps. And yes, you still get to leverage Power BI and embed it in a Power App. I'm just having so much fun just kind of stumbling around and learning about some of these pieces myself. And yes, Kirsten, I promise I won't write any code without at least running it by you first. So, anyway, well, thank you all. I appreciate your time today. And again, I usually tell people we love project technologies, optimization of business. So whether it's coaching, consulting, training, pick up the phone, call us. Hopefully this was helpful for you today. And from Kirsten and I from Advisicon, we just appreciate the opportunity to share. And so, Kirsten, anything before we sign off? Anything you want to say?
Thank you for being here and allowing us to share with you the excitement of PowerApps.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Take care.